Welcome back to another episode of the Shared Practices podcast. I just got back from the Voices of Dentistry here in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I had a great weekend. I enjoyed meeting a lot of you, and at the event, I interviewed Paul Goodman. And Paul, we've kind of talked about him on the podcast, and he's part of our Facebook group, and he's very active on Facebook in general, but we've never actually done a formal episode with him. And actually, Paul, I talked about it probably in a few episodes. Paul and I released the Ownership Accelerator together. And so I had Paul on this episode talk about one of the sections of the accelerator that I'm the least comfortable with when we decided on creating the course and everything. And that's really what it's like being a new practice owner and what it's like being a new dentist in your new office. Obviously, that's something I've never done before. And so I felt like Paul, probably his most integral contributions to the course and related to the content was this section. So I had him on the podcast and I interviewed him at Voices of Dentistry to talk about that episode. And so this is a really great interview, I think. And Paul really goes into depth about his experiences with staff. And he, Paul's pretty funny. I didn't realize how funny he was until I hung out with him at Voices of Dentistry. So I think you guys are going to enjoy this episode. A little bit of humor in there towards the end. But definitely a great episode. If you haven't had the opportunity already, my ebook just came out, The Keys to Buying the Right Dental Practice, explained using real stories with real buyers. And so if you haven't had a chance to download that ebook, I have a link in the show notes. But let's go ahead and jump straight to the interview with Paul Goodman. Welcome back to another episode of the Shared Practices podcast. I got a special edition for you. We're at Voices of Dentistry, so if you hear some noise in the background, that's what that is. And I have with me Paul Goodman. He directed the Ownership Accelerator with me, and a great resource, and I'll let him introduce himself here in a minute, but I'm really excited for today's episode. In the season, we've been talking about, after assuming ownership, wrapping up season 2, and so Paul has a lot of insight as a dentist who's acquired multiple practices. He's gone into practices and learned how to assimilate with the team and transition ownership as a clinician and whatnot. So I'll let Paul talk about that today, and we're looking forward to the episode. How are you doing today, Paul?
I'm doing great, George. Happy to be here. It's been an amazing conference. Everyone should put this on their 2019 CE to-do list. I mean, it's really just what dentistry should be about: learning, sharing, having a good time. So thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. And, it's funny that we haven't done an episode just me and you or Richard and you on the podcast yet. You've contributed so much to what we do, but we're excited to finally have you on.
I think what you're doing, George and Richard, is just totally amazing for the field because it's an opportunity for dentists to really gather so much information that's important at a young age. And as I spoke about in my lecture yesterday, a lot of the stuff just isn't available. So I think you guys are just trailblazers in putting this out there. And just like any skill you learn, it could be from riding a bike to playing sports to eating nachos. I've always been good at eating nachos. So, that was a natural talent. That was inside of me all along. But when you start thinking about this stuff in your formative time, dental school, residency, you're prepared for when practice brokers are going to come to you, start talking about practices, start talking about the numbers involved with practices. So I think you guys should be really proud of what you're doing.
I appreciate it, Paul. And I wanted to have you introduce yourself to our audience formally.
Sure.
I don't think they've ever really met you. So why don't you just go ahead and tell us a little about yourself, your background, and whatnot.
I'd be happy to. So I'm Paul Goodman. I'm 40 years old. I like long walks on the beach. No, just joking. But I do a lot of different things in the dental space. So I do practice 3 days a week. I have 2 practices with my brother in central New Jersey. So about 60% of my life is doing clinical dentistry. Since we have a group-style practice, I'm very lucky. When you're in a group-style practice with multiple general dentist specialists, you actually get to focus on what you like to do. And I focus a lot on planning implant cases and restoring implant cases, which for people, if you haven't done that, it's actually fairly straightforward type work. A lot less complications than doing root canals, extractions, and crowns during the day. So it gives me the opportunity to manage the practices while I'm there because we have about 20 staff members between the 2 offices. So it is like running a dental circus in a fun way and sometimes a way that can stress you out. But over the time, we've acquired 3 dental practices, so I'll be happy to talk a little bit about that. But, other things that I do in the dental world are teach dental implant cases with Hyacinth, teach general dentists how to place dental implants. I love doing that. I've done that for 12 years. Teach at the Temple AGD and Albert Einstein GPR. Lecture on transitions and implants. Speaking really is my favorite thing to do. I say, believe it or not, more than eating nachos. So maybe you guys got a sense of that yesterday. And then running dental nachos and doing some consulting and transition brokering makes up the rest of it. So that's sort of me on a nacho plate, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think you have a lot of different perspectives
you were a buyer yourself and you understand, since you do some buyer coaching, the buyer's perspective. But then as a broker, I think you offer that unique perspective, is understanding the seller and the buyer as well and working with both of them. And that's what I think makes you maybe a unique resource in the space.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I like being that person, and I just have experience in all different phases. And even now, I'll look to acquire additional practices. So while I'm a broker and selling practices, I'm also on the buyer side. So I'm dealing with this on an everyday basis, which just kind of keeps me sharp on all the things that happen. As you know, dentists are a unique breed of human being, and a lot of times they'll be in their dental home for years and years and years. They may see some other dentists at CE courses, but when it comes time to sell, they really haven't put any thought into the process. And I actually have this joke, dentists will spend more time picking a lab for their zirconia crowns, which posterior, which, spoiler alert, they're all pretty good. But they'll spend no time picking a broker for one of their life's biggest decisions. And I'm hoping to, creating some. My goal is to just put some good information out into the space, like you're doing as well with shared practices, because as I say, this is really one of the most important decisions dentists are going to make on either end.
Yeah, I think, from our perspective, we talk about the buyer a lot, but the seller as well. The broker they select has a lot to do with the success of the transaction. But from the buyer's perspective, I think the practice they buy, whatever one they choose, will have a huge effect on their income. And that's really the whole point of everything we do almost.
Yeah, and I always say to the young residents, just young people, when you're making a decision that's hard to undo, marriage, having children, buying a practice, it's important just to really spend a lot of time on that investigation phase, because it's gonna change your life. Hopefully it's for the better, but I deal with situations where dental practice buyer's remorse, and it's hard to unwind that scenario once you've bought it. And it's better not to engage in going down that path. And hopefully I am just a person people can rely on. I get a lot of messages from people on your group, from Dental Nachos, asking questions, and I've really enjoyed doing some of this buyer coaching along the way, because there aren't enough people out there to be there for the buyer. And as you've noticed with your courses, that's why it's such a help to have a resource like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I really want to talk about today is, so now in our season at least, we've now acquired a practice for the most part. And so now you're dealing with the struggles of early practice ownership.
Gotcha.
And so I want you to talk about, maybe your experience and what kind of advice you would give somebody who's acquiring a practice and new ownership, and how they would handle that.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that and to tell you about what my experience. I mean, this isn't the time to talk about startups, but if you start up your own dental practice, you can create every system you want. You can buy any chair. You want to have turquoise blue chairs, you have turquoise blue chairs. You want to have an espresso in the waiting room, you can have that. But when you acquire a practice, you're moving into a dental home that's been in existence for a long time, and the culture has been established, good, bad, or indifferent. And one of the things I think the buyers have to remember is the seller has maintained this for decades, and they've been financially successful. It's provided them with a living. Usually it's provided them with sending their children to college, vacations, their own house. So sometimes a buyer will come in even after they purchase the practice and feel like there's a lot, quote unquote, wrong in the practice. But I would encourage them not to make any enormous changes within the first 6 months, because what you're buying is the goodwill of that dentist. And we can talk about whether you have the dentist or don't, because I've had both scenarios. But let's just say we don't have the dentist this scenario for whatever reason. Picks up to go to.
So you say don't have the dentist, as in like the new dentist comes in, other one leaves right away?
He leaves right away for whatever reason. Practice is too small, wants to move to Florida, a medical issue. And the patients already have to see a new dentist, right? And remember, I really think dentistry is an awesome field to be in, but a lot of the things that we're doing are, you're not doing open heart surgery the first time someone comes in. You're doing cleanings and fillings, and it's if you can keep the space as familiar to that patient as possible. So while your wife or you might say, I cannot stand this artwork on the walls. I can't have that in my practice. I want to change it. I recommend you don't, because if you think about things that you've gone into when you've gone to a new place, any place, a new restaurant, changed ownerships, or a new place where you go for your hair, if they make a lot of changes when you walk in, it just feels different. It's actually it's an emotion that you can't really describe.
Yeah.
So keeping the decor, as long as, I always say to my, whether buyer clients or I say to my own team, unless something is unsafe for the patient or unsafe for the staff, let's just keep it the same. Usually a good time frame for that is about 6 months, because then everybody's come for their recall exam. They've gotten to meet you in a time where you don't have the dentist. If you do have the team members there, again, this is an important point. Team members in a practice for a long time, they really like to be there. They've been there for decades. And if you change their home, they're going to be insulted, right? So if you walk to the front desk and say, I don't like the chair that you're sitting in. The arms have, masking tape on it. It's just going to be an abrasive thing to that front desk person because they've been sitting there with that front desk chair for 10 years. And maybe that's, you don't like that, and I could totally understand. It's just you have to resist. Sometimes have you ever seen the show Scrubs with Zach Braff?
No.
Back in the day. Well, Scrubs was one of my favorite shows because he had this internal monologue all the time. And that's what we all have, and it's funny. So I always tell people, just because you think something in your head doesn't have to be said, right? I said, just because you think it doesn't mean it should be said in the real world. So you need another guy to say, hey, is this going to be received well? And it's not easy to do all the time. And on another end, as the dentist, it's really hard to take over a practice, be the main person. Now you're seeing all new people. One thing I want to point out, just I bring in hopefully some valuable things. The reason, if you acquire a practice, and you could be a dental student acquiring a practice, a resident, a seasoned dentist, how many patients do you have in your school that you treat? George's people, would you say?
Like 70?
70, right? So these 70 people have really gotten to know you. They've gotten to like you. So when you sit some of them down, and you even now is just 2 years of experience in clinic, right? You guys have 2 years. They know Dr. George or to be Dr. George, right? And you've developed a rapport with them, and you can kind of just start working a lot. And this is a super important point to remember. When you acquire a practice, every patient is a new patient to you. And you need to create time to spend with that patient, to ask them about their life, because I don't actually love this quote because I think it's a little overused, but you never get a second chance to make a first impression. For dentistry, it's important because people don't want to be there anyway, right? So if you come in and you don't ask them about some personal things that are positive, right? Positive personal things, going on vacations, you like any restaurants, if they have grandchildren, don't ask them, what do you think of the political climate in the U.S., right? Because it's a super polarizing issue and there's no right answer to it. So you have to create extra time in your schedule. So you may think and dentists have these interesting dental ego muscles where I'll say to the resident, if you were going to go in private practice next month and work in my practice, and I said you could do an occlusal composite on number 19, tell me how much time you would schedule, right? And they always choose a time that's ridiculously short because they're using their dental ego and say, 30 minutes, no problem, right?
Yeah.
The problem is they're thinking of how much time it takes to drill on a patient they know or type it on. But what happens in the real world is you sit the patient down, they never met you. It could be an 11-minute process till you make the patient numb. You make the patient numb, now it's another 9 minutes, you start working on the tooth. Before you know it, you haven't prepped the tooth and the appointment's over. And that's because most people do not realize it's a human being that's never met you, and they're not just ready to jump into doing things. That's why when I hire associates, I always try to, I'll have them do hygiene, I'll have them do night guards. I try to create procedures where not a lot goes wrong, so the patient will like them, right? So sometimes you can't help it. If you're acquiring a practice with your wife and you have a patient who needs an emergency root canal, you might just have to do it. But that's not a bad scenario because the person's coming in with an emergency problem. But if you said to somebody, all right, you're on this recall exam, you got a big amalgam on number 2, you think, this is the time to tell them they need a crown. You tell them they need a crown, they probably don't want it. They say they do it, and then you have probably what would be considered a miserable time with number 2. The patient doesn't open. This brings me to a good point. Patient doesn't open, it takes longer than expected. You've kind of created a not so great experience with the patient, and they're not going to necessarily leave the practice or run out, ask for their chart, but they're really on guard for the new dentist, because remember, they've been going to Doc Smith for 40 years. Some of these patients, 20, 30 years, they've never seen another dental provider. It's not an easy thing to handle as a new dentist coming into the practice. So these are some of the tips that would offer to your listeners.
No, I think that's fantastic. And I think, a lot of times we come in with such a preconceived notion of how we want things to be and, not necessarily realizing the implications of making those changes.
And what I would point out is you don't even know. I've used this example of having the child, right? So nobody knows how tired you're going to be when you have a child. You're like, I'm going to be tired. And you're like, wow, I'm 4 times as tired, right?
Yeah.
So when you acquire practice, it's like you think it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be much more work than you think. So why don't you just put to the side work that doesn't affect much, right? Changing the decor, getting, a new computer because you don't like their old desktop. Those are things that are chronic issues that can be handled at any time because you're going to have enough acute issues. And, at this meeting here, and I've actually read a lot about it, and Mark Costa spoke about it, awesome stuff on decision fatigue, and it's a real thing. And now as a 40-year-old person doing these things, when you wake up in the morning and you go to work at 9 a.m., you only have a certain amount of mental energy to make decisions. And as a new owner, you should put most of that energy towards making a positive connection with the patient. And if you use up that energy on extraneous things, you sometimes don't have that energy to treat the patients well, interact with the patients.
Yeah, and I think if you change a lot of things, some of them, like you had mentioned, are not maybe ROI changes, like you're not going to see a return on that change, but doing something like having a good communication with the patient, or maybe adding a financial option, something that maybe a simple change could have a bigger effect on your bottom line than other things.
And your team's important too, so take that extra time. I always say compliment your team in front of the patient all the time. So I always say, this is a great x-ray, thanks for this, because it actually makes you seem like, your goal is to seem likable and credible. And since most people are young, they're not going to seem very credible. I mean, it's probably, people are jealous of that, right? So if you see a 53-year-old with gray hair, he seems credible, but he might not like that look, right? But he's credible due to his age and appearance. You and your wife, if you use an example, are going to look young. Your credibility isn't going to just come with your looks. So now you got likability to focus on, and there's ways to be likable that are techniques, right? If I say it's calculating, it doesn't sound honest. But if I say it's a system, when you come in, compliment your team on anything you can in a genuine way, in a specific way, right? I have a great management coach. She's phenomenal, non-dentist. She's given me so many of these little catchphrases. One is just like, recognize behaviors, repeat it. It works with your kids too. So, if you recognize the positive things they do, they're going to want to repeat it, like taking a good x-ray, setting up the room well. And that is your most important two things. Work with your staff to develop whatever systems, ask them what they do, and focus on positive patient interactions. And that'll take up most of your time for the first 6 months.
Oh yeah, and I think going into it, I think we have the fortune of being in a profession where you don't have to, it's not like a restaurant where you have to do everything perfect to barely make any money.
Right.
We have relatively high margins, and so I think you don't have to go in there and run around like a chicken with your head cut off to make a good living, and I think that's important to realize.
One of the things I want to point out too when you acquire a practice is, you're acquiring a practice, you're taking out a loan. Usually there's some working capital involved in the loan. If you've been approved, the bank knows you're not down to your last dollar. So if there are some human element investments, like lunch for your team, even a team meeting, like I highly recommend that before you get a day started. I mean, it could be an entire day, it could be the morning. Then when you walk in on the first day, that there's just a 2-hour team meeting where you provide breakfast and you just talk with them, and you're there to just hear about how they do things. And I can help people with those types of meetings, because running a meeting, I mean, if there's things that dentists are super unqualified to do, it's to run a meeting. If you see a dentist try to run a meeting, it's painful, right? Because a lot of times they've never been in an actual meeting. How they think they want to run it is the opposite of how you should run it. A lot of times they come off unintentionally being aggressive, inflammatory, and insulting. So it's, how you ask questions to the team, not like, why do you guys use only 2 burrs, right? Because, old guy dentistry, they're very crafty, right? They got one scaler and they got one chamfer burr. That's how they do all their dentistry. Now you're coming in with all this, I say it like, youthful dental enthusiasm, and you might put out 10 burrs for a crown prep, right? This is just an easy example. But now that dental assistant, I was a server, if my manager said to me, now you got to do 10 things for this table instead of 2, it's going to be, I'm not going to like it. Yeah. Doesn't mean I'm not going to do it, but how you present that is important, and how you gather information from them is important.
So how would you present that in a way that would not be inflammatory or aggressive?
So first, I would not schedule any elective complicated procedures like a crown, a root canal, veneer, for at least a week, right? Because nobody needs any of those things if they're not in pain. Because then it gives you the time to have a nice rapport with the assistant on easy things. Let's do a simple filling, and let's do a straightforward filling, let's do a night guard, let's see how we work together, hand things off. So the more complexities you put into it, the more things can go wrong, and the more the assistant, believe it, dental teams really want to do a good job for you, right? But if they've only been trained in one way, you see this all the time. Do you ever watch any of these reality chef TV shows or reality cooking TV shows? They go into these restaurants where people have been cooking for 25 years, and they're like, this is terrible what you're doing. But that's the only way they know how to do it, so they feel bad because they say, oh, this is just how the doctor told me. If the dentist isn't there, you don't even have anyone to help with the middle ground. Now if we talk about if the dentist is there, that's a whole nother layer of complexity, but it's a good one. So I always like the dentist to be there when possible.
So how does that change the dynamic when the dentist stays on?
Well, when the dentist stays on, it's a double-edged sword, but I always would prefer that, because I took over a practice where the dentist was ill. We never actually met him, unfortunately. We met his wife. And that is difficult and we were seasoned dentists. So if I was not a seasoned dentist, that would be even tougher, because I had his team. They're upset the dentist is not well, right? That's just an upsetting thing. He had to sell his practice because he had a life-ending disease. So I go in there and I'm trying to sort of find out what he did. I couldn't even read his notes. So that's challenging. When the dentist is there, the value is you can talk to him behind the scenes, but you have to do the same thing with him. Not why do you do gold crowns on number 2? Like, oh, tell me about your crowns. When do you like, what materials do you like to use? Right. It's like not asking inflammatory questions. Dentists have a tendency to ask a question that they don't mean to be inflammatory, but it comes out incredibly inflammatory. So you got to like round off how you speak to them so that they're open to sharing with you. And you just say, oh, that sounds good. I'd like to learn about that. Surprisingly, you could go in thinking this guy's not going to teach you anything about clinical dentistry, and you wind up picking up some interesting things because the guy's been out there for 40 years doing it. And when he's there or she's there, it usually creates a buffer between you and the team that's a good one, because it's like having the grandfather to help with the children. It's like, don't act like that, right? Like, yeah. So the grandfather, I was just like, now he's the grandfather, you're the father, but you're the new father. You just showed up, right?
Yeah.
It's like a movie. You showed up. We got a new dad. It's George, right? So it's like, so if you have no grandfather and the kids are acting up, I don't want to make the staff like the children, but like if they're acting up, it's just like, you're like, I don't know what to do. But if he's like, hey, Jennifer, don't do this with Dr. George. You got to come back from lunch on time. Perfect example. Because they're going to test you, right? So This is such a good example. I have a daughter, Daphne. She's 3 years old. She's awesome. She's an insane person, right? I mean, if she was here, she would be into everything. She's like a monkey that drinks espresso in her free time. So if you two were watching her, you and Jeremy, she would try to pull all kinds of stuff with you. I mean, she would be like over here saying, I can have the sugar packets. My dad lets me, right? She'd be lying to your face. And there's a good Tom Papa joke because he's like, when you're an uncle, you know you're doing the wrong thing when you take your nephew and niece out to the grocery store, and they're like, can we have Count Chocula or, Frosted Flakes? And he's like, oh, you can get both. And they're like, really? Because he knows that, like, he's being too permissive with them. So your team is the same way. They will test the limits. So when the dentist is there, it's a helpful authority figure to have, but you have to be cautious about also insulting him or her accidentally, because sometimes it's no different than the grandfather situation. If you went over your parents' house when you have kids, and you're like, why do you have this why do you have this coffee table with spikes sticking out of it, right? Because my child's going to impale themselves on it. Yeah. You got to say, like, hey, Mom and Dad, my daughter gets into a lot of stuff. Can we move this coffee table out? So word choice is super important in these businesses, because dental businesses are like no other. You're physically close to everybody all day. The patients don't want to be there. And you're trying to do full contact arts and crafts in their mouth at the same time. So it's great to be a dentist because it can be rewarding, you can make money, you can still work like good hours, right? Most people aren't working Sundays till 7, but it's challenging because you got to put on this, I always say to the students, you got to put on this show every day nobody wants to see, and you're kind of taking the existing show and players in it and finding out how they work together, and that's the acquisition. That's the acquisition challenges, but I still love acquisitions.
Quick word from our sponsor, Q Optics. I've got with us here Brent Downs, who is the director of sales at Q Optics, and he's got a little bit of advice for that new dentist going to their first conference.
We'll call her the light bulb lady. This goes back to the early 90s. I was in a booth right next to her, and this lady was legendary in how she would attract people into her booth. And the unsuspecting dentist, within a matter of just a few seconds, would have his bags on the ground and 2 light bulbs in his hands.
And we're talking like color corrected ceiling lights or something?
Exactly. Exactly. And she was just a master at communicating, but she was also one of the most pesky sales reps that I've ever met in my life. It got to the point where she was around for years. People would see her walking down the aisle and they would literally turn around to avoid her. And it made for just a miserable experience for me.
Working next to her.
Exactly. I didn't have a whole lot of people to talk to that week. And the point is, the lesson that I learned from that is just, don't be afraid to say no. You're not going to hurt any feelings. It's just business, and they've got a job to do. Maybe they're a little bit aggressive in how they go about it, but you have to protect your self-interest. So no is a good thing to say.
It's a good little word to learn, and you're never going to hurt anyone's feelings just by learning a little bit and moving on.
Exactly.
Awesome. If you're ready to upgrade your magnification experience, send an email to sales@qoptics.com. using the promo code SP16 for $100 off a pair of loupes or $300 off a loupe and light combo. They will figure out who the rep in your area is and schedule a demo for you where you can get fitted, try them out, see for yourselves. Worst case scenario, you say no. Not a big deal. Q Optics. Have a better look.
Because,
yeah, I think that's the thing. For me, I've looked at a lot of acquisition opportunities, and now I'm in the process of wrapping up my own, and it's tough because the one thing that doesn't translate between opportunities is team. You know how they do things in the office. It's like it's so unique and weird, and every office has its own quirks. And we learn ideal practices, but when you get in there, it's just that's not the way it's done.
I mean, and the team is valuable because, like, when I took over that practice where the dentist was sick, you have this. There's a good book, Raving Fans. John Coyce recommends it. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's pretty short, and it has a lot of the consulty, hokey stuff in it, but it has a lot of good, important points. And he makes all his team read it, and it talks about. The message is you don't have to be everybody's dentist, right? So you acquire a practice, and we did it. I kind of felt like, well, I want to keep every patient that comes. But the team was good because they're like, you may not want to keep this one patient. This happened to me. There was a guy, he was just mentally unstable. But I was like, I'll fix it. I'll deal with him, right? So we got a cleaning, got this. He was doing okay. But then he needed a root canal, and he thought he needed a filling. And we had an enormous blow up. And he stormed out of the office, said he's going to report me to somebody, blah, blah. And the front desk person was like, see, I told you. And I learned from that, right? So if I acquire another patient, practice again, and I have that, I might manage it differently. I'm not saying I'm going to just kick the guy out of the practice, but I might refer him right to a prosthodontist. Because look, they're in their lecture on prosthodontists. If you're not, it's interesting. I posted on Dental Nachos, and maybe not everybody has the ability to do this. And maybe I'm lucky to be in New Jersey where there's all these great prosthodontists. But I'm just floored that people are not referring patients to prosthodontists more often based on total patient behavior. Right.
Well, that's most of their job is dealing with expectations and.
You could say it nicely. So if I had this guy again, and I can go back in time like Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future, and I met him, I would say his name isn't Bill, but I say, hey Bill, I'm glad you've been here for a long time. Really like to meet you. I want the best job for you. I always say this: my job is to get you to the best dentist to see you. Sometimes that's me, and there's sometimes someone better than me. So if I were in your shoes, I'd want this person with special training because he did need fairly complex work. He was extraordinarily difficult to work on for a filling. So here's would you like to sign up for this? You're going to lose money and be aggravated. Does that sound like a good scenario to be in? So that was, but I didn't know because it was my first acquisition. I was like, I just want to keep everybody. So one thing for your listeners, if you acquire them, if a few patients fall off, that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, there's always going to be some attrition. I think, you have to also, what do you want to do? What do you want your practice to be like? And some patients may not fit that mold.
Yeah, totally.
And so that's okay. You'll have the majority of them will stay.
So, I always try to tell them, you got to keep things in perspective. One patient is going to make or break a practice. It is more important to be a little more on the staff side or the team side than the patient side. So, like I said, we have a criteria in our office. If I have asked you to do something that you find to be unsafe or immoral, that will damage you or the patient, then you can call me out and you can challenge me. But if it is not in that category, we need to just do it. Because if I say, I want you to seat this person in room 3, because I know they're nuts in the waiting room, and I just want them out of the waiting room. I might know that, right? The assistant might not. And they say, well, if we're not going to get to them for 20 minutes, those are the things that you have to have talks with your team about. Like, hey, we're our team, but there's a coach, right? And if everybody's calling the play, it's going to go crazy, right? And sometimes, I put it back to them, certain things in the office, they're the coach, right? Their coach I'll help with sterilization, I'm really into infection control, but I'm a bystander, they're the leaders, right? So if they tell me they want something here from me, I will do that. It's not easy to do that. I learned a lot of that. I want to point out, in my lecture, every single dental practice in the country should have a line item for consulting and coaching, because the fact that dentists do not engage consultants and coaches every year, to me, is totally nuts. Because you're running, a lot of times, a multi-million-dollar business. You had very little training to do this. And the expense you have in consulting and coaching, if you ask anybody who uses consulting and coaching, they do not really complain about the expense because they realize it's such a priceless thing to them as a provider. But many dentists are, I'll use the word short-sighted, and they say, I don't want to spend money on this. But that falls under the dentist cheap category that I talked about yesterday.
Yeah.
I do not want to spend $1,000 a month on consulting, but I'm happy to buy this CEREC that I never use, right?
Yeah.
So that is one of my major messages, really, especially for acquisitions. Get a coach or consultant that you can count on. And it doesn't have to be someone who comes every month. I had a great one when we started. He came in quarterly from Denver. he met with us and did some general talking. I mean, the internet wasn't the same as it was in 2005, so he'd write us reports. We'd check in with him. We'd call him on the phone. It was an expense that I thought was actually totally reasonable. I was just posting this on one of the other groups. Someone said that they spent $400,000 on a coach in 5 years. That's an egregious expense. I'm surprised they signed up for that.
Yeah, me too. I wanted to pull back to
Sure.
something that you talked about yesterday. It's a little bit off topic for what our lecture is, but I think given your speaking style, I think off topic
Sure.
is fitting. So you talked about the patient who leaves the practice the most often is the one who lives far away, but comes just because of the fact that the previous dentist was there.
Yeah.
So as a buyer, that's something that I see. When you said that, I was thinking of that answer, and I was wondering, how do you go into an acquisition and predict what it, is there any way to...
It's a good point. So a lot of times, a lot of it's not done in a linear fashion. It's really interviewing the owner. So dentists are usually very proud of this. Okay, they're usually proud that someone travels from an hour away. It makes them feel good because they feel special, and I would feel special too. But those patients create a lot of problems. So in my practice, I'm not going anywhere for a while. I got some people come from an hour and 15 minutes away. I've told them to get another dentist. They don't want to. Because I've told them, if you have a problem, like they're the people who come on hygiene visits, and they say, can I do my filling when I'm there? I'm like, no, you cannot, because that throws off my system. So these patients are usually very loyal to the practice, but when the dentist changes over, they're likely going to find someone closer. Predicting that is interviewing the patients and staff and probably doing a zip code search. Like even Dentrix, it's not my strong suit, but I have a Kate in my office who's fabulous. So if I was acquiring my own practice, I would look at the zip code searches, and I would look at a map, however, and I'd see how many patients fall outside of this and who these people are. See, it also matters what kind of work they do, right? So a lot of times these patients aren't doing this just for cleanings, because they would really be insane people, right? It's usually people who need a lot of work. And if the dentist is going to be there, you can keep them. See, my friend who I was speaking about in the lecture, he kept those patients for 3 years. So he may have gotten a lot of value out of them, but they're leaving now that the older dentist is leaving, and he's not upset. He's trying to manage it. He's bought maybe another practice, and he gets it. So I think it's just talking with the owner, doing a zip code search, and seeing, and it's just acknowledging that in a fee-for-service type of office, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And
I think what you had talked about in the lecture in that point is, the fee-for-service practice, which we just finished a few episodes on, versus the PPO practice, the reason that they're coming there is more likely that it's due to their insurance as well, so you have a better chance of retaining that patient.
Just to finish the circle, in a PPO practice, do you think people travel that far? Probably not.
Yeah.
Because they're using their card. So it's like you go to Supercuts for your haircut, and you got the card, you just go to Supercuts closer to you.
Yeah.
So it's already solved in the PPO practice, because the number of people coming from far out is just probably a lot less.
So you think that somebody acquiring PPO practice is less of a concern than somebody acquiring? Would you even consider it if you're acquiring?
Not a major concern if the practice is mainly PPO.
Yeah.
So I have this scenario in my own thing. So we have a fee-for-service office essentially, and then we have a PPO style office. And I'm learning myself. I really have separated these over the last years for all the things I think are happening in dentistry. And it doesn't mean it's the right move. It really doesn't. There's dentists they always want the answer to the test before they take the test, right? Tell me what's going to be a total success or a total failure. I'm like, usually it's somewhere in between. So I've done this. My main office is essentially fee-for-service. And I've taken some of those patients that were PPO and moved them into a different office. And I see that they have taken to the dentist there very well, which I like. So I bet you if I even sold that office or got a new associate there, those PPO people probably keep coming because they're loyal to the building.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all loyal to buildings, right? We love buildings, right? So that's why when you acquire a practice, people just like to drive to the same building to get the same stuff done. And going back to the beginning, that's why you just don't want to do anything to damage that relationship up front. So if you said, hey, this tooth is broken, it needs a crown, and they said Doc Smith never did crowns, and you look in their chart and they have 4 crowns, you got a problem, right? Because Doc Smith did the crowns. They're essentially saying they've never had a crown. You now need to call them a liar during the hygiene check. So usually you just need to say is, hey, if it's not bothering you, I use this all the time. And it's totally fair. If this is not causing you any pain, just call me if you have any pain and we'll check it next time. Because that's fine. Someone missing a buccal cusp on number 19, their life's gonna keep going, right? It's like a chicken and the egg problem. If someone is missing part of their tooth, you show it to them even in a mirror, and they say, I do not want to do anything about it, you have a tough scenario, right? Because 9 out of 10 people will be like, all right, let's do something about it. So don't worry about those people. Dentists just have laser focus on stuff that goes wrong. So if you have that person and you've acquired the practice and they've claimed they've never gotten a crown, even though they have 4 crowns, say, you know what, if it bothers you, call me if it bothers you. If not, we'll check it next time. So those are the situations that I talk about when I do these, my own transitions and try to help with that, because they're the stuff that it's like, what's your favorite sport, George?
Basketball?
Yeah, it's like, so there's a perfect example. I played high school basketball. Like, there's stuff that doesn't show up on the stat sheet, right? So you think it's like points per game, rebounds per game, but these are all things, it's like what people would call as a kid, like the hustle factor, the dive for the loose ball factor. They're hard things to plan for. They're things that just happen organically, and sometimes I mess them up myself, right? Sometimes the thing is, it's interesting. Being a waiter was a great experience for me. Server. Worked at all different restaurants. The problem is what you think you want to do and what you feel you want to do from your life to that point is often not the best thing to do. And it's a hard thing to have happen. It's a hard thing to manage in your brain.
So how can you tie that back into the practice? So the newly acquired practice, how does that principle
Basically,
relate?
trying not to damage any of the goodwill you've purchased by being too dentisty, right?
Or short-sighted.
Short-sighted. So be more person-y, be more human-y, right?
Yeah.
If the person does not have an infection, swelling, or pain, if you think that sending the person out of your practice would cause them to have a bad event, then you've got to stand your ground. Take antibiotics, get the tooth out, but out of all the scenarios that happen in a general practice, that's probably like 5% of them. A lot of times it's dentist being too dentisty, like you gotta have this crown, or you need to fix this tooth, and they use those words a lot, right? And those are bad words to use, you need to have this done. And remember, that goes back to the culture. Why do you think that a 63-year-old dentist is what people would deem conservative? They don't recommend too much stuff, they seem to be kind of like not up to date. Why do you think that happens? Like, why do you think that's going to happen to you?
I think it's just over years of having that relationship with patients and maybe hearing a lot of no's, I guess you could
totally.
say.
You're just emotionally exhausted.
Yeah.
And you've been around the block so many times, it's not that big a deal. It's the patient's decision anyway, and you don't feel like arguing. Now, someone has a 70% bone loss, I'm going to put a thing that we're referring you to a periodontist, put it in your chart, here are the cards. You don't go, don't come back to me. I don't say it as bluntly as, don't come back to me and be upset if you know all your teeth out. But there's so much just grayness in what goes on in people's mouths. And when you acquire and even one of the dual broker reps who I spoke negatively about, she actually gave me this great advice, and it was great. I appreciate it. She goes, everybody gives you a first chance. Everybody has their chart there. They want to go to the place, so try not to make waves on the first recall visit.
Yeah.
Especially recall visits. That's interesting. It's like recall visits are like when you bring your car in, right? You bring it in for maintenance and you're hoping they don't say anything's wrong, right?
Yeah.
So when they say, hey, George, we've got a couple things wrong, you're like, oh, God, you're just upset. And what's interesting? Dentists they take things way too personally. And this is what happened to me as a server. They shouldn't take it. When the person gets upset in the chair, the dentist feels like they're getting upset at them, but they're just getting upset with the situation the same way you are if you need new brakes, right?
Yeah.
Your mechanic says you need new brakes. You should be happy. He doesn't want you to crash, right?
Yeah.
But you never say, hooray, new brakes. You go like, oh, you always say, how much is it going to cost me, right?
Yeah.
And your inside changes, right? So you just have to recognize that's part of the human experience, and you would be the same way if you were sitting in the chair. I always say, you're sitting in the chair treating yourself like some, Fight Club or Matrix situation where you could be the dentist and the patient. You would learn so much because you would learn about the emotions that happen when you tell yourself about work.
I guess it's very true.
Yeah.
It's easily relatable to me because I actually went to the mechanic last time for my oil change. I had to get my brakes changed too.
And also, I also say to the patients, this is what they say a lot, and I love talking about patient management. I know you've had Justin Short on, who's awesome. You'll say to a patient, his tooth's broken. I use a lot of different words, but let's say you're getting to the crown, right? Tooth could benefit from a crown. It's going to be protected. They go, well, will I lose it if I don't get a crown? And I say, I don't know. I'm like, I don't have a crystal ball, Mr. Smith, right? You're going to have to decide. Just like your mechanic, if you said to him, will I be in a crash if I don't get new brakes? He's going to be like, I don't know. Why, maybe. And when you do that to patients, you become much more likable. I'm not as aggressive as I am talking to you. I make it a little more rounder. But you act like a normal person. hey, I don't know. I've seen a lot of patients that have this tooth, they keep it for 20 years. I've seen also people that split it down the middle and need an implant, and an implant's $5,000 start to finish, just as an example. So now this is another from Carol Kibler, who's our management coach. It's so good. This is just so valuable. People do not argue with their own decisions. So what happens is, when you give them the power to make the decision, they will not argue with it. When you decide for them, they will argue with you later. So you just have to really just kind of keep throwing it back onto the patient as nicely as possible. And then at the end, just say, what fits? I started that from Mark Hyman. It's another great lecture. I don't like to steal people's stuff. So Mark Hyman said to me, when I said it, lecturing with a student, which option fits best in your life at this time? You say that, then because you guys don't realize you have 70 patients, right?
Yeah.
You're coming into a world where you're going to have like thousands of patients, right? So you just get exhausted by talking all the time, right? You think, oh, I come into school, I know people, these are my people. Now you're going to come into a practice, you're going to have hygiene checks, you're going to have new patients, you're going to have work to do. It's not easy on your brain, back to that decision fatigue.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
As we wrap up Season 2 of the Shared Practices podcast and conclude our discussion about acquisitions, I wanted to share a project that I've been working on for quite some time. A lot of the experiences that I've been able to share on the podcast are a direct result of people who have been reaching out to me for the last couple years with help finding, analyzing, and ultimately getting into practice ownership. I've learned a ton from these experiences, and I've had the great fortune of looking at hundreds of dental practices for sale. Now, something that I have been working on is an ebook to chronicle my experience and some of the key lessons that I've learned and ultimately designed and created the Ownership Accelerator. I think it's through these people's experiences that you can really see a lot of the things that go into an acquisition, maybe behind the scenes or from my perspective. And so today I'm excited to announce the release of my ebook, Keys to Buying the Right Dental Practice, explained using real stories with real buyers. I go through each chapter talking about a specific experience I had with a buyer and the lesson that relates to the process of buying a dental practice. In the 9th chapter, I talk about how to start your career off on the right foot and ultimately the genesis of the Ownership Accelerator. I think it's a great read, and it's very candid through my own perspective on my experiences dealing with buyers, and you'll be able to see a little bit how it works on the back end, me getting emails, my thoughts as I'm going through it, and I try to be as open and honest as possible while still preserving the buyers involved confidentiality. They've all agreed to share their experiences, and so I'm super excited to announce the release of my ebook. If you want to download it, you can download it for free at book.sharedpractices.com. Again, that is book.sharedpractices.com. I'm super excited, and I hope you download a copy and read my book, Keys to Buying the Right Dental Practice, explained using real stories with real buyers. I'll go ahead and leave a link in the show notes.
And I want to go back to, so we had Sandy Pardue on the podcast maybe
she's
4 or 5
awesome.
episodes ago, and I think she had taken a completely different approach to what you've been talking about, and that's why I wanted to have you on, because
Sure.
I know you have a different
What was
perspective.
her approach?
So her approach was, in the process of making a change, there's already a lot of change. You know, a new dentist, there's going to be change. And so she wanted to use that opportunity to make the change the way that she wants it to be. So changing things to the way that you want them to be, because of the fact that there's going to be change anyway. And so what do you say in your approach now? You're trying to weather the storm, so to speak, and then at around 6 months, you start to maybe try making some changes. How do you make that transition from, with the team? And
So I always think, Sandy Pardue is awesome, and she probably has a lot. I'm a dentist playing a consultant on TV. She's a consultant doing this all the time. So the number of offices that she's worked with in this is probably, hundreds or thousands, and this is her profession. So what she says is probably excellent advice, but I am just coming at it from sort of a player coach, like in the NBA. They don't have these anymore. And when you get to that 6 month mark, what would be an example of something you think you would want to change your own practice? And I could be happy to tell you how I approach it.
So what about the way that hygiene is scheduled?
Okay.
I think that's a relatively big topic with the team that you don't want to take on immediately. Not a major ROI.
Yeah.
But eventually it's something that you would want to do. But if you're playing this game of, I'm challenging you a little bit.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
If you're playing this game of trying to weather the storm, which I'm with you and I plan on doing myself, when you're ready to make that change, how do you...
It's a great question. It's probably one that's going to come up. So first of all, I'm just a huge fan of short team meetings, right? Short ones, not 4 hours. Nobody wants to sit there. Like, we're sitting at these CE courses, they're great, and they're changing up the speakers every time, but all of us as adults, especially with social media and our phone, our brain works differently, right? So I always try to have, in that scenario, I'd have like a team meeting, team get together, provide food, Decide when it fits into your office schedule. It could be in the beginning of the day, it could be in the middle of the day, or the end of the day. If it's going to be one piece of advice is, if you're going to make a change that you think is going to be met with some resistance, I wouldn't do it in the middle of the day. Here's why. I've done it many times and had a mistake. Because then people go back to work in a bad mood, right? So what happens is, and then sometimes you don't get a chance to talk it out. So let's just say you have one day in your office that's 9 to 3 on a Tuesday. You got to let people know ahead of time, because you could have single moms, you could have people with stuff to do. So let them know how to say, we're going to have our team. And that's why it's good for them to be scheduled quarterly or every other month, so they expect it. Tuesdays, 3 to 4 is our meeting. I'm going to get coffee and muffins, whatever you want. You guys tell me some things you want on the agenda. I have some stuff for me, right? But you know, at that meeting, your goal is to talk about the hygiene change. But when it's like your wife listening to you, or you talking to your wife, you don't like when it's just a one-sided conversation. So maybe they talk about, I don't know, not enough. We provide snacks for our employees. They love that. Our team members, so they're like, we don't like the snacks, right? We don't like pretzels. We want potato chips. It's easy. I just get them the potato chips, right? But then they feel like they're heard. And I'm not being disingenuous. But when I get to my part about changing the hygiene schedule, I have another consultant, Mark Doria, was great. He talked about situation, behavior, impact, right? SBI all the time. And the way you present it to them has to be in a way that's, you're thinking about making something positive for everybody. What do you guys think about this? Hey guys, I know in this office we have 45-minute hygiene visits, and that's how you've done it. It looks like you guys are doing a great job with the patients. My thought is there's ways that we could remanage this for help us all, right? And then you would ask for them, what's the situation? And you have to tell me a little more about why you would want to change it. So I'm just going to use the example of, you don't think they're doing a thorough enough job with the intraoral camera, and your goal is to capture more restorative work, okay? So that's your goal. You think in 45 minutes they do the cleaning, you come in and do the exam, but there's not enough time for this extra stuff, right?
Okay.
So that's what in your mind, so you say the situation is, I know a lot of people talk to you, I know a lot of people are difficult cleanings, you have to really be on their side. I know, sometimes I'm not getting into the exam, right? Sometimes it's my fault, and that's going to happen, right? Sometimes I'm not getting to the exam in time for you. So my goal would be for us to have 60-minute hygiene visits, and here's the why, right? I want you guys to have more time to do things that I think are fun and important, right? We have intraoral cameras. I'd love if you guys took 2 pictures. You always make it easy, right? Like, I like you to take 2 pictures. We had this. One of a good tooth, one of a problem. Like, don't say, I want you to take a picture of recession every single time because someone's not going to have recession. Make it like a very easy, like, I want you to take a picture of a good tooth and a picture of a problem. Everybody's got at least one problem, because you could just take a picture of their calculus. So when I come into the room, I'd love to look up on that screen and say, Mrs. Smith, this is a great tooth you're keeping here. See how it's, gum tissue health is fine. There's no restorations. But see this tooth over here? And so who talked about this? And I'm not sure who talked about this, but see this tooth over here? It's got missing piece of filling, right? And you're telling them that you're going to support them in this change. And then I have another great line that I do all the time. We could talk a lot about some people have been crying when I'm talking about changes. Let's try this for 60 days. If we don't like it, let's talk about switching back. It diffuses all of their anxiety. So if you say, let's try it for 60 days, I'm on board with you guys, we will meet back in 60 days. And that's why when you have meetings, you have got to keep your minutes well, whether you're not, because you have to make a list of what you talked about, and then you have to revisit it at the next meeting. That's a real problem, because most dentists will talk about all this stuff, then they'll have a new meeting, and they never talked about having enough cups for the coffee like we're ever here, right?
Yeah.
And they try really hard, your staff. So you got to recognize the behavior and say, hey guys, I know, remember when we were running out of cups for the people for coffee at this conference room? We're not running out anymore. I really appreciate it, because that's why dentists are totally incapable, or they're not capable, they've never been trained to how to run these meetings. So that would be my tip. Talk about the why, talk about situation, behavior, impact, 2 shorter visits, making you guys feel rushed, not impact, we're not enough time, solve the problem for them and say, let's try it for 60 days. If it doesn't go well, we'll all change back. Because I will tell you, I've never changed back, because it's usually a good idea.
Yeah.
It's not an amazing idea. I mean, I'll just tell you a quick story. It'll be funny for your listeners that they're driving to work. When I when I joined my dad's practice, I love everything with Starbucks, and I love things with Nordstrom. I love systems. I like Starbucks. You ever walk into Starbucks? You ever walk into Starbucks? Are they wearing a pink apron ever? Never, right? They're always wearing the green apron, right? I love that. So I said to our team, everybody, because I didn't like they were wearing Christmas scrubs in July, Halloween scrubs in April, freaking mismatched scrubs, because my dad and his partner was easygoing guys, right? They actually paid for all their scrubs. They just gave them money and said, go buy what you want. So I didn't like the way the team looked. So I wanted to, this is what I said to them. Hey guys, on Mondays, let's all wear the same color scrubs, okay? You guys can pick the color, okay? I want you to get together. We pay for the scrubs. All I want you to do is get together, buy one new pair, and on Mondays only, I want you to wear the same color. Anything sound unreasonable in what I asked? Or I'd like you to, no, we're all gonna wear the same color. I actually, if they picked a female color, I wasn't gonna wear. Anything unreasonable, we're gonna pay for them. You can pick them out yourself, and it's just on Mondays, and we're gonna do it as a team. Sound reasonable?
Seems like it.
Yeah. Here's the response. The office manager came into my room, started crying, told me she had spent a lot of money on scrubs and kept them in a special closet in her room, in her bedroom, and she didn't want to spend more money. So that was just a lie. We bought all the scrubs. So they just throw in facts that aren't even true, like, your kids, right? Then I had another hygienist who I love, but she was really reactive. She goes, I come from a country where I was oppressed. Feel this is oppressive. Again, a crazy thing, but you got to be in the moment. Remember, being a good leader doesn't always mean saying, okay. So I always went back to, we're going to try it for 60 days. If we don't like it, we're going to switch back. Now, fast forward 12 years, everyone wears navy blue scrubs. We monogram them. Everybody likes them, right?
Every day?
Every single day. Yeah. And we've had all kinds of things. Women, everybody comes in all different shapes and sizes. So they have these fashion shows. They put them together. They order them together. It's a lot of work, but we always look clean. We always look good. And to me, that's important, right? Some dentists, it's not important. Some people, they saw the money I spent on scrubs. They'd be like, that's a waste. To me, it's not a waste. It's just not. That's what I believe in. One other quick story was we get an hour. They used to get an hour for lunch every single day. Now we have different lunch times, but back then, lunch was 12 to 1. Everything was the same. It was like 9 to 5 day, 12 to 1 lunch. I thought, we live in this town with a lot of, businesses. People might want to come and get bleach trays on lunch. They may want to come and stop by and, I don't know, have their crown bite, right? I thought that would be a good time because that seemed to be the town lunch hour. So me as the leader thought, let's be open during the town lunch hour and we will have lunch from 1 to 2. Again, sound like a reasonable thing?
Sure.
Yeah. So I brought these people into my office. One of the assistants said, I don't like your new system that we can't have lunch anymore. I said, again, you are not using words correctly. I just moved it from 1 to 2. Another person said, I can't wait that long to eat. I said, just have some of the free snacks. So much resistance, right? But guess what happened? So I said, same thing. If you don't like it, we will change back. Now, this was really genius for a lot of ways. So we had the day from 9 to 5. Everyone has more energy in the morning. So we were doing 9 to 12, 3 hours, lunch 12 to 1, and then 1 to 5. So we were putting more time in the afternoon when people were tired. I didn't like that. Secondly, in our town, there's a pizza place. It's like one of those things. Great pizza place, great deli, and one other place. That's it, right? So everybody likes to go out to lunch, right? So when you go to lunch at 12 o'clock at the pizza place, it is a 14-minute wait. So I said, try it and let me hear back. You know what happened? I go, thanks, Paul. This was your best idea ever. Because now when we go to the pizza place, there's no line. Because now they're going when other people are on lunch. So the system that they were yelling about, or the change, they wound up loving. So it's just like your own children sometimes. They don't always know what's going to be best for the group. And those are just 2 examples of my long history of making these changes. But you got to the point there is like, you can't make 6 of those at once. You want the hygiene different, that's all you do for like 3 months, right? Unless it's unsafe or immoral. Don't do another one the next month and another one the next month. You can tweak and do things like, I'm not a crazy person, somebody who doesn't want to, I don't know, like you don't like the tissues that you get, you can get new tissues. That's not a crazy change, but something that's been a core part of the office, I'd look to make only 4 changes in a year, quarterly changes.
And so part of your planning would be making sure what 4 changes would be the biggest impact.
And one of the other things, and one of the ones that you think you're going to make before you acquire aren't going to be the ones. They're going to happen organically while you're in the practice. So keep them to yourself, right? Like if you think about hygiene time for your own practice, George, you may think that that's important. But as you're there for that first 3 months, you're going to find something that you didn't even think about that you want to change.
Yeah.
Because the game's going to be being played, and you're playing terrible defense, right? You thought you were going to come in and the defense was going to be great, and then you get the Warriors are knocking down threes all day long on your team. So you're like, we better revisit this, and that's like. Super Bowl's coming up, like Bill Belichick is like the best at in-game adjustments, right? Like he's losing the game and he magically comes back and wins. That's pretty impressive because he makes these adjustments in the game, and you got to make the adjustments in your office game, it's not a 60-minute NFL game, but my point is like when Bill Belichick goes into a game, he thinks he has a game plan. Something happens in the first half, he changes for the second half. You're going to go in with your game plan. Something's going to happen in those 3 months. Maybe you'll call me and let me know and say you were right. I thought we were fine with the XYZ, and it wasn't fine. So
I appreciate that.
Sure.
So kind of to wrap things up then.
Sure.
You would really recommend taking things slow with the patients and the team,
For sure.
and then implementing changes slowly, quarterly, with proper rounded approach with the team.
Yeah.
And then I like that. I like 4 changes a year. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and my last thing would be, Google, even if you don't have a consultant and Google how to run meetings, effective team meetings, because there's all these good tips. I mean, I think you guys might, my team meetings are not much different than my lectures. And it's a lot of engagement. It's a lot of explaining the why. It's a lot of repetitive stuff, right? My first consultant said management is a lot of repetition. So Dennis, I mean, you got to get a new job, okay? New career, anyone out there. If you do not like repeating yourself, you should not be a dentist, because you're going to repeat yourself to the patients and you're going to repeat yourself to the team for the rest of your life. So you have to just totally get over that repeating yourself is a stress for you. So you're going to tell your team that you want them to be there at 8:22, and you're going to repeat that time and time again, because they're not going to be there at that time until you develop a system that will solve that problem, just as an example. So management's repetition, try to just, keep things in perspective, right? Not safe. It's not safe, or it's not immoral, just not a big deal, right? It's a deal, not a big deal.
Yeah.
Too many dentists don't say anything for 4 months and then blow up about some small thing because it's been festering inside of them and they never told anyone about it. So that would be my parting words. So I appreciate you having me on here, George. I like all the work we're doing. I think, you are a real leader in this dental world, and dentistry's lucky to have you.
Appreciate it, Paul. Yeah, you're definitely way more entertaining than I am. So it was good hearing you talk for the last 40 minutes or whatever, how long we've been recording.
Thanks,
All right.
guys. Have a good day. Thanks.
Well, I hope you guys really enjoyed that episode. Paul, he just has such a different experience and, I guess, perspective than Sandy Pardue, who was on the podcast a few episodes ago and talking about almost a completely different approach. And, I think Paul maybe overstates, or maybe I felt like it could be misinterpreted, his approach exactly. And so I feel like he's very cautious with core principles of the practice and specific things that are maybe essential, like important to the team. But naturally, with any transition, there's a lot of change. But I think what Paul really tries to stress is to keep as many things the same as possible, because a lot of the changes that we try to make don't have a really big impact on the bottom line, and there's really no purpose in changing them immediately. And those are things that can definitely wait. And, Paul does say in the episode, if it's dangerous to the patient or something like that, then it needs to be addressed immediately. But I think his experience as a dentist really shows in his approach, valuing the importance of creating a great relationship with both the patients and the team. And that's his primary objective and priority going into a practice acquisition. Another thing I really like that he said, it was kind of funny when he was talking about the basketball analogy, saying that you go in with a game plan and then the Warriors are draining threes. In other words, you go in with a game plan and then things happen in the practice. It looks different. It feels different than what maybe you had expected. And so maybe to keep an open mind, and that's something that I need to be careful of myself, because going into a practice acquisition, I have all these ideas in mind of things that I want to get done in what order. But I think I need to have that in mind, but maybe be flexible based on what happens when we get in there. Things could change. And so I think your plan going into an acquisition should be a little fluid based on what's happening as you get in there. So I think the most important thing to remember is maybe take it slow with the team and maybe some core things from the practice, and then assess things as you're going through it and make changes as need be. So that really wrapped up the Voices of Dentistry episode. I hope you guys didn't mind the crowd background noise. It was interesting recording in that environment. It's something I've never really done before. I think I'm much more comfortable recording in the privacy of my own studio, where you can kind of sit through things and not worry about all the things going around in the environment. That being said, I had a great time at the Voices of Dentistry. I enjoyed meeting a lot of you, and it's funny. One of you that I met told me that they can't believe that I invite people to contact me over email on the podcast, and he was really blown away that I do that. And he kind of asked me, like, "Do people really contact you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's honestly." I told him it's honestly my favorite part of the whole thing. Everything that I do at Shared Practices is talking to you guys personally and helping you out. I think it's the most rewarding thing that I do. And so it's something that I really enjoyed doing. And I thought it was funny that I just thought I'd bring up that one story where that particular listener was really baffled that I would do that. But either way, this has been another episode of the Shared Practices podcast, straight from the Voices of Dentistry. If you haven't had a chance, download my ebook. There'll be a link in the show notes. And thank you for listening. We'll see you next week on the Shared Practices Podcast.